My 93-year-old great-uncle laid here in the emergency room. My aunt and I sat with him, unsure of what was going on. We distraughtly repeat to him, "We love you, Uncle John," to which he responds, "I know. I know." There is fear in us all, though we didn't know how to talk about it. The beeps of the hospital continued, and we sat and we waited. My uncle began to speak and mumbled the phrase he used to tell me growing up as a kid. "Shira koto ga nai." Its meaning in Japanese, that it cannot be helped. He sat up, pulled me over, and began to talk. And piece by piece, he went on to divulge the stories that have made up his life. He prefaces this all and forewarns me, saying, "This is something you'll never know in your life, and you're lucky for that." I'm what they call yonsei, meaning fourth generation Japanese. The experiences my family's had in the US is an often forgotten story. My uncle is the last surviving member of his generation, the last to have experienced Japanese internment during World War II. The scare of him in the hospital set a heavy obligation in me to find out more about him, this man whom I've always looked up to. Months later, I go out to visit my uncle in his home, and we sit in his dining room. I bring out his collection of photos dating back to his childhood, growing up in San Francisco. He groans and mumbles and says, "Hell, let's get on with this. You want to know more about my stories again? Well, I'll tell you." His eyes fixate on the leather binding of an album. It begins.
They call me Uncle John. I was born in a little community called Hayward, California, on November the 25th, 1921.
My uncle's name in Japanese is Takeo, representing strength. He's the youngest of four, living with his parents and three older sisters.
My mother was quite educated. She was one of the few Japanese girls that was able to attend a school. So she was able to read and write. But when I was a little kid, I spoke no Japanese. The first Japanese word I heard was what I was called, what we call a bakatare. It means dummy.
He notes, growing up was different back then.
Most of our lives were, in those days, clustered by ethnic background. The Japanese stuck together with Japanese, the Chinese, Hispanics, all stayed among themselves. The only association myself with being a Japanese American was in school.
And that's the way it was throughout his childhood, the way he grew up. And at the age of 21, all Japanese Americans were marked as undesirables, with the executive order to evacuate their homes and relocate.
The whole world changed in World War II. That's when the bottom fell out. Until then, I didn't know one single thing about discrimination or anything like that. Because my mother always used to say, you have to do the best you can. Never give up. With the advent of war, everything changed. All of a sudden, I started listening to what was going on, and I realized, hey, we're getting picked on. All I knew was everything was happening so fast. We had curfew, we couldn't go travel any place. My dad had to give up all his Japanese records and cameras and whatever we had. They came in and they just took it. And then, all of a sudden, in the meantime, the government was building 10 or 11 what they call relocation camps. Now, there, when we were transported after 6 months or so when it was ready, now we were stuck onto a train. That train was something that came out of the old cowboy movie. It was a gas-lit train. We rode all night, couldn't even go to the bathroom, and ended up in the place Utah.
And from being transported from California, he was placed in a camp, rows of barracks in the middle of the Utah desert.
Barracks, army barracks, tar paper barracks. Only walls separated between rooms were sheetrocks, no ceilings. The only ceiling we had was a roof. And there were no chairs, nothing. And the only thing we were given was a big white bag, and we filled with straw and made mattresses out of it. And my situation, I had my mother, my father, and 3 sisters. There's 5 of us. Or 6 of us, 5 of us. And my problem was there was no privacy for my sisters.
And so my uncles and family's time in camp began, and this is how they came into their new lives. They were each given jobs and responsibilities, and as Uncle John recalls,
well, I had jobs with my brother-in-law doing electrical work. And within the concentration camp, there was a barrier space between the living quarters and the outside fence. It was a no-go zone.
And while working one day, a guard on the perimeter calls out to my uncle and says,
John, why don't you go up the thing? I said, well, I'll go up there if you answer my question for me. I asked him, you tell me what those lights are for. Are they to keep me out or keep them out? And he didn't reply, so I told him, stick it up his, you know what, and do it himself. So that was that.
And for almost 2 years, he lived in Topaz. Towards the end of his detention, the CIA came in to question him, to question his loyalty.
And I met this young guy, and he asked me a lot of questions. He was writing a lot of stuff. And he eventually said, will you sign this and I'll release you? I said, well, I can't sign that. He said, why not? I said, because I never said any of that. So I got up, and he's yelling and screaming, and I walked out. And I figured, what the heck, what can they do to me? Naive young kid. And all my friends called me I was crazy. I said to him, what have I got to lose? I don't have any citizenship. They want me to go out there and get my rear end blown off for nothing. I said, what am I fighting for?
Uncle John left camp before the rest of his family. The war brought a deficit in labor, so he was able to go and pick beets and potatoes out in Idaho. The war had then soon ended, and the camps were shutting down. He moved out to New York with $20 and found a wage of 75 cents an hour in the city. Though soon after arriving in New York, he learned of bad news.
So it's an emotional thing, okay? My dad died of cancer. So I couldn't even go to the funeral. I was in New York, avoiding the draft. So I being the male of the family, I felt it was my duty, in the Japanese system, the duty of the son taking care of the family.
And so now, as the only caretaker and man left in the family, Uncle John took his mother in. She moved in from camp into a cold water flat with him, where they lived for a few months. Though without being able to make a decent wage, as a young 23-year-old Japanese American post-World War II, he had to do what he had resisted most. He joined the Army and enlisted in military service.
And that's the ironic part. Tried to avoid the draft. I ended up being an officer. I've been lucky, but it's not a happy life. My life has been tough. Full of worries, boy. What about my mother? How would you like to go to leave camp with $20 in your pocket and no place to stay, and only clothes you got is what you have on your back in a little bag? Nowhere to turn. Try to buy something to eat. You look at your money, see how much you got. The only thing I could afford then was grilled cheese sandwiches. My mother was a housewife. She worked doing clean houses. They would test her off. She would steal it. They'd leave $1 there. She wouldn't touch it. Loose change around. She'd put the money down. They'd test her honesty. Stuff like that used to get me mad, you know. But that's how life was. And I never asked one thing from my parents because I knew we were poor. You ever think of a kid that never had a bicycle? I never asked for a bicycle. My mother asked me why. Couldn't afford it. I walked. That's how my life was. It's a struggle all the way. And your mother, your grandmother, people asked her why she worked so hard for these two kids. All the money was, that's why they don't have much money. They sent all these kids to college. They didn't want these kids to live the kind of life they lived. Just like I don't want you guys to live like I do. All old people got a history that they don't want to tell the kids because it ain't a happy life. That's why every parent says to the kids, I want them to have a better life, an American dream. That's what it is. And you guys are the dream that we dream about.